Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Paul Heinrich, and I'll be chairing this meeting of the Development Committee of NNDC on 25th July today. Many meetings yesterday. For anyone who hasn't attended one of these meetings before, officers who provide advice and present our reports sit either side of me, top table, in front of me in a central area, sit members of the committee who'll be making decisions on the items on the agenda today. Can officers introduce themselves, please?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jeff Lyon. I'm the Development Manager.
Morning, my name is Joseph Barrow and I'm a Senior Planning Officer.
Lauren Gregory, Democratic Services.
Good morning, Colin Rubin, Team Leader in Planning.
Morning, Russell Stock, Senior Planning Officer.
Russell Williams, Assistant Director for Planning.
Fiona Croxton, Solicitor to the Council.
Thank you. So I'd like to welcome members of the public, both those here in the chamber and those viewing remotely. Members of the public registered to speak, I will call you to the front when it's your turn, except where other arrangements have been made. Before we start the formal business, the usual notices. With fire alarm, we're not expecting a drill today, so if the alarm does sound, it is for real, in which case please follow officers using the marked exits and assemble in the car park at the front of the building or at the flagpole to the rear. Do not use the lift, of course. If you have a mobile phone, could you please switch it off or to silent? We may or may not require a short break around about 11. If we do so, I would like to remind members of the public who are around at that time, they should not try and speak to councillors during that break and certainly not during the meeting. And if you haven't found already, the toilets are out in the foyer opposite the lift. Thank you. Apologies for absence, please, Lauren.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Martin Beattie, Councillor Peter Fisher and Councillor Rory MacDonald. And with respect to the next item, Councillor Callum Ringer is present as a substitute for Councillor Martin Beattie.
Thank you. Item 4 is items urgent business. We have a request from the Assistant Director. Pardon? Oh, what? Oh, so yes, it's the one. No, it's missed out on my list here. That's why, Lauren.
Apologies, we didn't have minutes at the last
You're
one.
confusing me. I'm going by that one. Apologies. Too many pieces of paper and one of them's not correct. We have minutes of a number of meetings: Thursday the 9th of May, Thursday 16th of May, Thursday 30th of May, busy month, and Thursday 13th of June. I don't propose to go through them and notice that you will have read them thoroughly. Are there any errors or amendments required to any of those minutes? Or are we happy to accept them as a true record? Please show of info. Yep. Okay, now to items of urgent business. Assistant Director.
Thank you, Chair. Technically, this isn't business because I'm not going to ask you to take a decision on anything, but I've just asked the Chair to give me a couple of minutes to update where we are with the local plan before the meeting starts formally and before you consider any of the applications before you today. As I believe Councillor Brown commented briefly at Council last night, the Council received the first letter from our independent inspector on our local plan examination earlier this week. You will recall, I'm sure, the long period of development of the draft local plan. It's been debated on a number of occasions at a number of different council settings over the years, and in the first part of this year an inspector held a number of hearing sessions in this very building, hearing from the council and people interested in that plan. The next stage was for him to write to us and bluntly tell us what he thinks and what we should do next. I understand he'd prepared a letter at some point in May, and we were about to get it when the general election was called. That put it back until after the King's speech and a few other things sort of unblocking log jams in the last few weeks. But it turned up at the start of the week. We will be publishing it later today, or that's the current plan, subject to all the IT bits and pieces working to do. that. What the inspector, Mr. David Reid, basically says is that the council has met most of its legal obligations around duty to cooperate and a few other legal matters associated with plan preparation. But before we can move forwards to adopt the plan, before it is sound, there are a small number of issues of varying complexity that we need to address. At one end of the spectrum, arguably, there's updating some evidence on a few bits and pieces, particularly gypsy and traveller accommodation needs, and potentially on the other end of the spectrum is he's taken the view we are short on housing supply numbers. So we've got a bit of work to do on that. In due course, that will lead to further consultation and all that sort of stuff with the public. And he is now quite clear that we're not going to be adopting a new plan in 2024. Hopefully it will be sometime around the end of the financial year 2024-25, so sort of March, April-ish next year. It's a 14-page letter. Other than acknowledging it, as Councillor Brown did last night publicly, my other main reason for speaking today is to observe that in my professional judgment, its receipt has no bearing on any of the applications you have before you today. So kind of ignore the fact we've got something. The draft local plan is already a material consideration of varying weights. If hypothetically we'd have had an application on the agenda today where the inspector had passed some comment on that site, then I would probably be giving slightly different advice. For sake of argument, just to use an example, we had an application come in earlier this week for a site of, let's just call it 50 houses somewhere, where the inspector in a 14-page letter has written 4 or 5 paragraphs on that particular site. So if that comes before you, before the plan is adopted, then clearly his letter will be of relevance. Doesn't mean it determines the outcome, but it will be of relevance. So it will be published later today, and it has no bearing, in my view, on what you are considering today. Okay.
Thank you. Order of business will be as on papers. So declarations of interest, just to save us all time, we've all been lobbied by applicants in relation to item 9 on our agenda. That can be recorded. If there are individual declarations, figures. That's holiday.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
That's holiday.
Thank you. I'm going to abstain on item 10. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item 11, I've met with the applicant in the past. I've given no advice at all. This is prior to him being a member.
Thank you. Councillor John Toy.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, agenda item 8, I was contacted as the local member by the agent after the papers were published. But we had no conversation and he was accepting of that. That would not be right for me to discuss it after the papers were published.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, this relates to agenda item 9. The applicant is a parish councillor in one of the villages that I represent, and I've previously expressed some support for this, so I will be abstaining, but I will just be speaking as ward member.
Thank you. Right, can we then move to the first application, Banningham PF/22/1068. Barrow, would you like to present?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, everyone else. If I may, I believe you have all been sent a submission from the agent in support of the scheme, and we would like to offer some comments on mostly the letters that have been published and sent round to you in that regard. The first one is a letter from Mr. Mark Turner. And his letter sort of has a number of bold headings, so my comments will be in relation to those bold headings in that way. The first point is about the lawful use of land. His first paragraph states that those comments are without prejudice. There is still the opportunity to appeal the certificate of lawfulness decision. we completely understand that, and I think generally the position as outlined in the report is reflected of our understanding of the use of the land as of today, but there is the possibility to appeal that use of the land in the future should they wish to. Moving through to the self-build element, the report does weigh that up. It is important to consider, of course, that the applicant is on the self-build register, and that should be put into the planning balance of the debate and the decision that you take today. In doing so, we believe that, and we understand that whilst it can be a self-build development, we must also ensure that it is a sustainable development, and the recommendation that is put to you takes account of that, and it's for yourselves in your decisions to discuss that balance and where you see fit the way that you wish to afford to it. With regards to the nutrient neutrality points, the suggestion is that they may wish to disconnect the property from the mains. At the end of the day, right now we do not have a submitted strategy. And the certificate of lawfulness does have a lot of decision, does have a lot of weight here, in that we are assessing this application as a new build dwelling, and therefore we must understand that in terms, these are new flows that we must consider, and for the reasons outlined in the report, that would be quite a strong reason for refusal at this time. And then with regards to highway grounds and consistency, the report does talk quite a lot about the similar application a couple of doors away. It is an important consideration. That application was approved at committee, and it was believed that we could secure some highway improvements to the access in question, and it has since been discovered that those improvements are not viable. Every case, of course, should be assessed on its own merits, and the report does do exactly that and set out our position. So I would encourage you to consider that and consider all of those factors when you're arriving at your decision today. So moving through onto the presentation itself, as you'll see from the papers, this is an application on land at Ambrose House off Mill Road in Banningham. The proposal description is demolition of existing buildings and erection of single-storey detached dwelling. As mentioned, of course, weight should be given to any self-build elements there as well. So the general location here is denoted by the red cross on the site, and it's sort of an area of landing behind a singular row of properties that are along Mill Road. The site location plan demonstrates the access there and sort of also the width of the site in behind those properties, with the aerial photo further demonstrating that site there. So this existing site plan demonstrates the building in question to which the certificate of lawfulness decision related, and that is the building which is proposed to be demolished at this time to make way for the proposed dwelling. And there's the proposed site plan. You'll also note indicative landscaping improvements as well throughout that, as well as the single story sort of three-part structure and design there. The existing elevations of the structure, there are other structures on site, but this is the main focus of and what the certificate of lawfulness was determined on. And the proposed elevations there of the dwelling you're considering today, with further close-up of the roof plan there, parking demonstrated as well to the western side of the proposal. So as you'll know from the report, an awful lot of consideration is given to the highway safety matters throughout this assessment. One of the comments is relating to Mill Road and its ability to sustain more traffic demand. This is Google Earth imagery of Mill Road, and the access there that's used for the site is just off to the right. So the focus on Mill Road is more about its width and lack of passing place provision. And again, further looking now, see that it's quite comfortable that access there onto Mill Road would have acceptable visibility, but it's more about the width of Mill Road. And then the sort of perhaps more considerable highway safety issue is this junction here, the Mill Road and B1145 junction. This was the junction which was subject of highway safety improvement conditions as part of the previous decision that committee made on the adjacent site. And it is this junction which has not been able to be improved in line with those conditions. And these images just show the sort of visibility in those hedgerows in situ that create the safety concern. Just looking at the site in question now, these are some of the existing structures on site, and these are all proposed to be demolished, as you've seen from the proposed site plan, and remodel the site in that way. And then just wider photos of the site itself, including just giving you a sense of its feel and openness as well. So this is the site location plan, just to show you for relevance the proximity to the adjacent relevant planning application. The building on the right-hand side of that location plan, it's a little almost L-shaped building. That is the building which is subject to be demolished as part of this application. So the main issues for consideration which are outlined within the report are the principle of development, the design and impact upon the character and appearance of the area and residential amenity, highway safety, trees, ecology and biodiversity, as well as habitat sites and other considerations. The recommendation for the refusal reasons that are outlined and specified within the report is for refusal, and these reasons are focused on the unsustainable location of the development, unacceptable impacts upon highway safety, lack of evidence to demonstrate that the proposal would be neutral, as well as insufficient evidence in relation to impacts upon protected species and trees at this time as well. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. I have a town and parish speaker, Mr. Richard Anderson Dungar. If you'd come to the microphone, please. You'll have 3 minutes from the time you begin to speak.
It's Richard Anderson Dungar, Chairman of Colwyn Parish Planning and Parish Council. Parish Council considered this application on the 15th of June 2022 with a response to object and would like to repeat their reasons. The land was garden land and sold at auction in December 2019 as amenity land, having been split from the main dwelling on the death of the previous owner. As amenity land, as far as the members understand, it should not be classed as a brownfield site. The building referred to is a summer house, which has drawn its power and water supply from the existing dwelling. Our local knowledge has been quite clear that this was never a residential dwelling, although much misinformation has been used to prove otherwise. We feel strongly that had the building been recognised as a dwelling, the land would have been marketed as residential and not amenity. It was established during the earlier application 200297 that the building was not considered a dwelling. The same fact was referred to in both the Highways and Landscape Officers' responses. The applicant's use of the site has been the subject of ongoing enforcement issues for the past 2 years. Residents of properties whose gardens adjoin the land were originally assured that it would not be built on and have suffered disturbance, disruption and severe loss of amenity over this time, including felling of mature trees and bonfires on site. At a pre-application meeting hosted by the Parish Council in August 2021, residents voiced their concerns to the agent and requested the applicant enter into a restrictive covenant to prevent additional buildings on the land and it being used for commercial purposes. The original application for the land included commercial storage related to the applicant's construction business. Traffic movements to and from the land increased over and above reasonable expectations in relation to amenity land. With regards to the case officer's comparison with the approved application 212507, the parish council gave support as the land was classified as infill, not amenity. The refusal to accept the certificate of lawfulness for the existing use of a building as a single dwelling house concludes this application, and we therefore support the case officer's recommendation for refusal. We are therefore asking the committee to support the planning officer's recommendation. Thanks very much.
Thank you. You'd like to return to your seat? I have no objecting speakers. I have one supporting speaker, Mark Turner.
Thank you, Chairman. Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for accommodating me today. My name is Mark Turner. I'm a chartered town planner and represent the applicants, Mr. and Mrs. Ambrose, who live in North Walsham with their two young girls. Excuse me. They're both Norfolk born and bred, and Mr. Ambrose, who took over his father's small building company, has long had an ambition to design and build a home for his family. In 22, he inherited money from his grandfather and bought a parcel of land in Banningham for that very purpose. In fact, he's been paying council tax to this council for a dwelling on that land since he bought it. Regardless of the parish chairman's comments, no formal enforcement action has been taken on that land. The application form, which was submitted in 22, states clearly that the development proposes for an affordable, self-build custom dwelling. The planning statement says the same. I can't explain to you why the council changed the description. I spoke to the planning officer, emailed the planning officer yesterday, who confirmed he hadn't actually looked at the form until yesterday. So something's gone astray here, and I think some of the concerns regarding the intended use of that land could have been allayed because it's being applied for self-build, and you will have controls. I've insisted that self-build was brought to your attention, not just because it's a material consideration, but because legislation puts a statutory duty on the council to provide sufficient self-build plots to meet its need. You can't currently meet your need, and this is a self-build plot, and the applicant is on your self-build register. I'll let your solicitor advise further on that. It would also appear, reading the objections from neighbours, that their concerns would have been alleviated had the self-built point been made clear by the council from the beginning. The owner of the land cannot place a restrictive covenant on himself, as was suggested, but you are invited to secure the self-built status of the proposal by way of planning condition, and I have provided planning inspectors' conditions that would secure that. The council officers have stated that land was incidental to the residential use of Chapel Cottage. We may disagree about that, but fundamentally I've been saying it's residential as well, regardless of the unqualified comments of the estate agents who sold it and who appear to be being relied on. This means the land is and meets the definition of previously developed land in accordance with the NPPF and confirmed by the Court of Appeal. This is exactly the sort of land government says we should be making effective use of to avoid having to develop on greenbelt or valuable agricultural land, especially so in cases where the councils can't demonstrate their 4 or 5 year housing land supply, let alone an adequate supply of self-built plots. In this instance, the highway's concerns are less vigorous than those raised regarding the new build property, we'll call it Watts Cottage, which was approved by committee contrary to officer recommendation. Unfortunately, the highway officer has failed to acknowledge the fact that the existing site was used by the previous owner to access.
I'm afraid of stopping at that point. You've had your 3 minutes. Thank you. Now we turn to local member, Councillor John Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, firstly, this was not called in by me, so and unfortunately that message didn't get to me either, but until I read the papers. However, we are where we are. Yeah, the question here is for me that I posed to the committee that the classification of the land appears to be an issue, which we've already done a decision on that previously, which there's a right to appeal. The completeness of the application in terms of the trees, protected species, wastewater treatment, And then the other one, highway safety. Regarding the access to the 1145 and highways always saying it's a dangerous road, we know, those local people know that there are businesses down there, the tractors come out of there. And actually ages ago, I'm probably talking 18 months to 2 years, Councillor Penfold, our county councillor, got agreement for that to be reduced to 30 miles an hour. So that's already improvements that have gone on that junction. So I think that that as an argument needs to be set aside, would be my suggestion to the committee. So where do we go? I believe it's amenity land. I also believe it's much bigger scale than the one that's been drawn in comparison. Watts Cottage was an infill, was supported by locals. This is a much bigger scale. And we know that it's a builder and there is, and I know it's not what we're deciding, but there is potential for more properties on the other end of that site. And this is amenity land that has always been that. So it's about the residential amenity of those that now back onto it who disagree with it, whereas the other one next door, people were in support of it. So I'm happy to listen to the debate, but I believe at this stage that officers have come to the right conclusion for this parcel of land and where it sits, and that the comparisons with that next door can't be drawn because that was a much more complete application. And the only issue really was the highways, which we dealt with in that committee meeting. This is about the completeness of this application, whether it's the appropriate land and whether we should allow that development. So I'll leave it there for the debate, Mr. Chairman. And obviously, normally I would not vote, but on this occasion, because I've not called it in, I'll listen to the debate and make a decision. Thank you.
I mean, the only thing I will sort of point out is obviously you've heard reference to the self-build register and a duty that's placed on the local planning authority. It's, to be clear, it's not like a 5-year land supply argument where you're looking at evidence-based need based on sort of housing projections, that sort of thing. This is a demand-based requirement. So your duty is to meet the demand that's in your area. And that demand is set out in part 1 of the register that we have to keep as a local planning authority. And there are 10 people currently on that register that the council maintains. Now, just because you're a self-build dwelling doesn't mean you can allow a self-build dwelling anywhere. There are still policies that you have to conform to as an applicant. The principal issues and the unsustainable issues that we raised here are significant matters that we feel would outweigh the meeting or of a custom or self-build dwelling. So we weighed that into the officer's report. We feel that you should give less weight because it's in an unsustainable location, irrespective of the other matters in relation to neutrality, which is a red line point in our view that would prevent you from granting your permission today anyway. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Members. Councillor Vickers.
Could I just have a point of clarification? The gentleman that spoke for the applicant said or implied that they may have been misled by the estate agent, that it was land on which a dwelling could be built and was sold as such. Is that a case that it was that land, or that they were simply allegedly misled? Can you reply to that?
I'm not going to get into any discussion about whether someone was misled. That's obviously a civil matter between the other parties. I mean, clearly what we as a committee have to be mindful of the fact that we've refused a certificate of lawfulness application for the use of that land as a dwelling. So the applicant does have a right of appeal and they can use that right of appeal. Now, clearly, if they were successful in getting a certificate of lawfulness, then that would change the assessment that you'd have to go through as a committee. But at this time, there is no lawful use for that building to be used as a dwelling. So we're assessing it as a new build dwelling in the countryside. And that's what's reflected in the report.
Sorry, Chairman, can I clarify? Obviously, it was.
You've had your opportunity to
There's a
speak.
question regarding a comment I'd made, Chair, and I think you're being misled as to what I was saying. Okay.
You've had your 3 minutes. If the committee wishes to clarify matters with you, they can ask me to then do so, but I will not have interruptions. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. I think I'm going to be sort of mercifully short on this. I think because of the doubt surrounding the certificate of lawfulness for the dwelling currently there and being sort of occupied, and the lack of a scheme for nutrient neutrality. I don't think that this is, with all due respect to Mr. Turner, a complete application as it's presented to us today. So I think merely on the face of it, parking aside or putting aside the comments from Highways, the visibility display, if there was an Olympic competition for a visibility display, it would probably be in a medal position. So that's not an issue. And we've heard from Councillor Toy that the upgrade of the junction with Mill Road and the B1145 has changed since the previous application in 2022 on Watts Cottage. I am afraid I don't feel I can support this particular application because it is a development in the countryside, and it's therefore contrary to a fairly sacred policy of this council, and rightly so. And I don't think there are any material benefits that outweigh the harm that would be done under the contravention of that policy as the application currently stands. So I'll be minded to accept the officer recommendation and vote for refusal at this stage. I will propose refusal, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree this is a more difficult one, and I'm having to weigh up an awful lot of pros and cons, but I'm afraid to say that looking at this, I have to agree that there will be more damage to anything than there will be a benefit. So I am happy to second the officer's recommendation for refusal.
Yeah, I have to share the thoughts expressed so far. There seem to be some grey areas. That there seems to be information that maybe could have helped the application. It's not there, but I am minded to refuse. Yeah.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Or we go? Yes, Councillor Hankins.
Thank you, Chairman. The Speaker made a point about the self-build part of this particular application. Is there a requirement for a certain level of self-build across the council? Is that an important point, or is that a sort of nice to have?
As I alluded to a minute ago, it's a demand-based register. So people apply to go onto the register. If they meet certain criteria, then they'll go on to what we call part one of the register. So it's not akin to your 5-year land supply where you're looking at all different factors. These are people have to register to be on there. That's your demand. So you assess that demand based on the register and whether you've met that demand over sort of the certain periods. So yeah, that's where that reference has come to, and the duty that's placed on the local planning authority in that regard.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Brown?
For.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett? For. Councillor Hankins? Councillor Heinrich?
For.
Councillor Holiday? Councillor Mancini Boyle? Councillor Neverway? Councillor Ringer?
For.
Councillor John Toy?
For.
Councillor Kim Toy? For. Councillor Varley? And Councillor Vickers?
Abstain.
That is 11 votes for, 1 abstention. The vote is carried.
The application is refused. You may, of course, appeal as usual. We can move on now to agenda item 9, application PO/23/2643 at West Beckham. When you're ready.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So this is item 9 on the agenda, which is presented on behalf of Officer Joe Medler. Application reference PO 232643 for the erection of a dwelling and carport and ancillary works. The application is in outline form with all matters reserved except for access. So I'll briefly go through the plans and photos. So here we have the site location plan, the site outlined in red, rest of the land owned by the applicant in blue. This is the site plan for demolition. So at the moment, the garden site that you can see on the right-hand side is covered by extensive tree cover. There is a small outbuilding on that site that would be removed. This is a proposed site plan. Please remember this is indicative only. So what's shown as a dwelling there, that's not what the finished product would be. Obviously, it's just to give an indication of what could be accommodated on the site. There is, again, the carport to the north of the site, and then the proposed vehicular access that would serve the dwelling at the top of the site. In terms of vehicular accesses, there are currently 2 vehicular accesses that serve Williams Barn. The one on the left-hand side would be retained for Williams Barn. The one on the right-hand side would serve the new dwelling. Important to clarify that the carport, as proposed, would serve Williams Barn and not the new dwelling. Again, these are indicative only, and again, just illustrates the type of house that could be accommodated on the site. In terms of biodiversity enhancement, there is a proposal for 10% biodiversity net gain on a paddock just to the south of Williams Barn on the southern end of the site. That would accommodate extensive tree planting, which would mitigate some of the loss of tree planting on the existing garden. This is a photo of the western access point. Again, that would be the access serving Williams Barn. And this is the eastern access point, which would be the proposed access for the new dwelling only. There'll be 2 photos now of visibility. So this is the visibility in an eastern direction. That's a point of contention raised by the Highways Authority, which we will cover later on, but that just gives you a general idea of the visibility. Now, obviously, it's not going to be absolutely reflective of the situation, but it's the best photo we have of the visibility from that access in that direction. And then the next photo will show the visibility, which is much better, which is in the other direction towards the west, towards the Wheatsheaf pub. This is the current frontage of Williams Barn, which is a gravel driveway, and just where that planter is on the left-hand side would be roughly where the new carport would go. And then the next photos just pan around these, just to give you a general idea of where the property would be. So it'd be down towards the left-hand side in the rear garden. So if we keep panning through the photos, this is down the side of Williams Barn. And then just pans around to the left towards the garden. This is looking back towards Williams Barn from the garden. And this is within the garden itself. So the dwelling would be situated within the garden somewhere. And again, that's the little outbuilding that proposed to be demolished. And again, these are just panning around within the garden. And that's the rear boundary to the left-hand side. So there's a few of these. Okay, so the main issue to cover on this application will be the principle of development, highway safety, some concerns in regards to trees and GI RAMs as well. In brief, I'll cover those matters. In terms of principle, as outlined in the report, the development as proposed is contrary to the aims of policies SS1, SS2, SS4 and SS6 of the adopted North Norfolk Core Strategy and the relevant paragraphs of the NPPF as stated in the report, as it proposes a new build market dwelling in the designated countryside policy area in an inherently unsustainable location. In terms of material considerations, One of these is, of course, the lack of a current housing land supply, and therefore applications must be considered in line with paragraph 11D of the NPPF, which supports the presumption in favour of sustainable development, taking account of the tilted balance. In case of para 11D, noting that the starting point in assessing proposals, whether it be against the adopted policies contained in the development plan. As mentioned, given the site's location in West Beckham as designated as countryside under policy SS2, it's not considered to be a sustainable location and therefore remains contrary to policies SS1 and SS2 of the core strategy. It should further be recognised that emerging local plan policies carry very limited weight at this time, and even so, West Beckham is not identified as a sustainable growth location under emerging planning policies. Any economic, social and environmental benefits associated with the development are considered to be limited and are not considered to be sufficient to outweigh the conflict with the adopted plan. So West Beckham does have a very limited range and number of services and facilities other than the Wheatsheaf Public House and St Helens and All Saints Church, both of which are in close proximity to the application site within walking distance, and a new dwelling would support these facilities to a limited degree. However, given this very limited level of services facilities, residents are likely to travel to other settlements for normal day-to-day needs and requirements, with very limited alternative transport modes available. The supporting statement with the application states the proposed dwelling would be a self-build / custom-build property. Very little evidence has been provided with the application to suggest that the proposed plot would indeed be a self-build or custom-build dwelling, other than name only, and through the offering of a unilateral undertaking, though one has not been presented. Irrespective of whether a dwelling is custom or self-build, this does not negate the application of the strategic development plan policies in terms of SS1 and SS2. In terms of highways impacts, members are advised there is a correction to be made in regards to page 64 of the report, which I did cover earlier. The proposed carport is to serve the existing barn, i.e. Williams Barn, and not the proposed dwelling, which would be served by its own parking directly outside of the property itself. And accordingly, that does remove some of the concerns relating to the retention of sufficient parking and turning space for the existing barn. The proposed dwelling would be served by one of two vehicular accesses that currently serve Williams Barn on a 30-mile-per-hour road. The existing eastern access would serve the application site, western access retained for Williams Barn. Norfolk County Council have objected to the application on the grounds that there will be a clear increase of vehicular movements attributable to a new dwelling, with a current lack of sufficient visibility displays at the site access. As such, the proposal is contrary to policies SCT5 and SS6. Finally, in terms of GI RAMs, the site does lie within a zone of influence of a number of European sites. This does require a financial contribution towards strategic mitigation package in accordance with the GIRAM strategy, but that payment hasn't been received to date, and therefore the proposal is contrary to policies SS4 and EN9. And there are also some concerns in regards to potential tree loss on the site, although remembering that this application is outline only, so that area is subject to some debate in terms of how much tree loss there would be, but also remembering that there would be some mitigation planting as part of biodiversity net gain. But to summarise, the proposed development is contrary to development plan policies as highlighted in the report pertaining to matters of principle, highway safety and ecology, and as such refusal is recommended. Thank you.
Thank you. Very thorough report. I have no parish speaker, I have no objecting speaker, I have one supporting speaker. Cole Wright. Please come to the microphone, please. You will have 3 minutes from the time you start speaking.
Good morning, Chairman, members. thank you for this opportunity to address you here today. And thank you to the officer for a very comprehensive, very well-written report. Your deliberations today follow 11 months of close working with your officers to secure the best option and biodiversity net gain solution for the site. It is not unusual that officers struggle to find supporting policies in the local plan to enable them to write a report with a recommendation for approval for a rural housing scheme. I therefore come before you today to urge you to consider those relevant material considerations and to decide in favor of this much needed self-built home for purpose-built single-story accommodation to meet the needs of older people in this part of the district, to meet the ever-growing need of the older people in our rural communities. We must build on brownfield sites in rural areas. We cannot depend on the limited number of thermally inefficient bungalows that are often too expensive and not fit for purpose, requiring several months and thousands of pounds to be spent on adaptation of them. Williams Barn is in the tourism asset zone, and it provides accommodation, visitor accommodation currently, the dwelling existing on the site, relieving pressures on the sensitive coastal areas. And this new replacement dwelling, which would be situated in the garden on a brownfield site as defined by the National Planning Policy Framework. Gardens in rural areas in the NPPF are defined as brownfield sites for this very reason, because of shortfall of land in rural areas for providing for the needs of our communities. The application is on an infield plot, and planning law requires that applications for planning permission be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless material considerations indicate otherwise. There are material considerations to be taken into account here. We have the NPPF paragraph 11 telling us that where there is no 5-year land supply, or in situations like ours in North Norfolk, where there is no 4-year land supply, that houses should be permitted in sustainable locations. A brownfield site in a village in need of homes for elderly people, accessible homes, single-story homes, self-built homes, is much needed and a material consideration. The fact that Williams Barn itself now provides tourism accommodation, taking the pressures away from the coast, means that there is now a need for a new dwelling in the village, which this house on the brownfield site will provide. It is an infill site. And of course, thank you. Not at all.
We now move to local member, Councillor Ringer.
Good morning, and I'd just like to take a couple of minutes to express my support for the application that is set out for you. This application is for outline permission for a dwelling with all matters reserved except for access. The development represents brownfield infill within the settlement boundary of West Beckham. A walk down Church Road in West Beckham would give you a clear idea that the principle of this development is consistent with the village as a whole, which consists of scattered older properties with newer additions, often in what would have been larger gardens. The applicants work with me and with officers, reducing the numbers of dwellings from 2 to 1 and bringing in biodiversity net gain directly adjacent to the site, which, in my view, tips the planning balance in favour of this application. Much like the recently approved affordable housing scheme close by, this proposal is ideally situated for the church, the play area and the Wheatsheaf public house. There is proposed cycle parking in Bodden, which is a mile away to the west, which would allow access to regular bus services. It's the pub that I want to turn my attention to briefly, as earlier this year it was subject to an informal pre-application IB 240143, which suggested a change of use. Thankfully, this has so far not progressed further, and efforts to list this as an ACV are underway, but it has helped focus the mind on the real threat to our smaller villages, which is not minor infill developments such as this, but the threat to the social, cultural and heritage institutions which underpin the sustainability and vitality of our communities. Something this development which would, in my view, contribute to preserving. Furthermore, on the principle of development, the council's lack of a 5-year land supply and its duty to provide a number of self-built properties is a material consideration which adds weight to the justification for deviating from the in part out of date existing local plan. And I understand the lack of a 5-year land supply is something that was highlighted as a shortcoming by the inspector for the emerging local plan. I acknowledge the arboricultural objection, but this doesn't seem to take into account consideration of the latest submission by the applicant, and of course these matters remain reserved for a future application, so there'll be an opportunity to get that right. The biodiversity net gain is to be situated immediately adjoining the site, and very important that any potential mitigation for development is located in close proximity to the site, and in this instance it can't get any closer. The major sticking point here is access, and access already exists here, and has done for many, many years. Highways objection, it's not entirely unexpected given form, but it is nonetheless a heavy-handed application of the rules, given that this is actually just a reallocation of an existing access. And it's a reallocation to a smaller property, which means that in reality, this access will probably see fewer vehicle movements from it rather than more. That you would expect from Williams Barn, a larger property. NPPF paragraph 115 states development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety, or the residual cumulative impact on the road network would be severe, and that's clearly not the case here. And given that all other matters are reserved, it would seem, and will have to come back for approval, it would seem strange to refuse this application on those grounds alone. The Parish Council have offered no objection to the proposal. Several residents have written in support, including neighbours in close proximity to this application site, and the one objection comes from a resident who has now sadly passed away. There are demonstrable material considerations why this minor, low-density infill development justify a departure from the local plan in order to meet the 5-year land supply, in order to meet the statutory requirement to provide adequate self-built properties, and to protect and support the sustainability and vitality of the village West Beckham, which this will do, and that's also set out as a material consideration in paragraph 79.134 of the NPPF. This application will not result in an unacceptable highways impact, as this is an existing access just being reallocated, and I think that actually it will result in fewer vehicle movements from it rather than more. And I would just ask my fellow members to refuse the officer recommendation in this case and approve this application. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor. Do officers wish to add anything at this point? Over to members. Councillor Fitch.
Sorry, Chairman, it always seems to be the Fitch Tillett show this morning.
As always.
I think as a planning authority, we have to be consistent in our decisions. And one of the things that I mourn in this application is the loss of that beautiful piece of ground at the back there. And I'm afraid I hear what Councillor Ringer has to say, and I accept some of his comments. However, we are a planning authority and we have to be consistent. So I'm afraid I have to propose that we go with the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the speakers this morning. That was really engaging, actually. It was good to see from everybody, so thank you. I pick up on the point of Councillor Fitch today about consistency and the application we had before us previously, where we'd had one approved and one turned down. The one that was approved previously wasn't infill in a garden where we found it acceptable, and that would be consistent to do that here. The highways issues have been addressed, and as Councillor Ringer said, true to form, what we expect from them. And so, yeah, I think I do understand also the concerns. I was concerned about the loss of that garden, but actually there's quite a bit of space in there. So I would like to see that as we come, if we approve it, and that's an assumption, that it comes back and we see a lot of that that's already there protected. That's what, because there is quite a bit of space there in amongst the trees, and then we still get the gain as well. So sadly, on this occasion, I would have to go against the officer's recommendation. I think we should approve this to retain that consistency with particularly with the application we discussed before. Thank you.
Thank you. appropriate point to remind you of the procedures that if you wish to approve, we have to vote on the officer recommendation first.
Just stating my position.
Always defer if you really must, but it is your decision. Councillor Varley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I just want to thank the case officer for his thorough report and also echo my colleagues' remarks on the speakers we've had so far. It's really nice to get that balance, and I think that will really help us with our determination here this morning. It is quite a contentious application with many aspects, and in regards to our determination as a committee, it's where we want to put weight on these aspects. And in regards of the biodiversity net gain, I think that's incredibly encouraging. I think it will have quite an impact. Certainly the land as well, we could, via conditions, have enhancement as well. It would appear, based on the local members' remarks, that the location is indeed sustainable. Mr. Chairman, I always remain open-minded, but at the moment, I'm struggling to. I'm really struggling to take the officer's recommendation. So I will listen to the rest of the debate, but I feel I might be headed towards refusal of the officer's recommendation, but we'll get to that point. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Councillor Varley. Councillor Vickers, and then Councillor Hankins.
I think both the speaker and Councillor Ringer made very persuasive points. I would, however, pick up on what Councillor Fitch-Tillett said, a very valid point about consistency in considering applications. And, you know, for my part, I think it's difficult for me to see the difference between the application that went before, which is why I abstained, and this application, other than that it has very vigorous support from the local member. However, I am minded to refuse.
Just to be clear, are you seconding? All right, right. Not a second. Councillor Hankins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too am very concerned about the various material factors involved in this. One of the things that I think should take priority over pretty well everything else is the provision of additional housing. And we've had a number of cases really recently where I was very concerned that we've turned them down, and that we're not providing the additional housing, which is a critical factor in North Norfolk. So I am minded to refuse the council, the officer's recommendation, and given some of the facts on it, to think again and review it, quite frankly. That's my situation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lyon.
I'm just sensing some of the comments that have been made so far, and I probably just need to remind members about what your development plan policy does say on development in the countryside, because this is a development in the countryside beyond the settlement boundaries. Officer Williams has obviously mentioned today about progression of the new local plan, but even in that local plan, this site isn't due to be allocated and will remain as countryside in the future development plan. Now, clearly, there are examples where we do allow dwellings in the countryside, and we have had two fairly recent examples in West Beckham where affordable dwellings were allowed in the countryside. That does accord with your development plan, because that does allow for exception housing in the countryside. What it doesn't allow for is market dwellings in the countryside without good reason. So you need to provide very clear reasoning as to what differentiates this proposal from the one that you've just considered on this same agenda, because there are a lot of similarities across those two applications. And obviously we need to be consistent in how we're approaching policy and making those decisions. Now, clearly, there are a number of material considerations that you would want to weigh in there. We've heard about BNG. This isn't a mandatory BNG application, so they're not obliged under the new law to provide 10%. This is an offer by the applicant over and above the 0.1% that we could legally require them to provide on this site. So it's obviously for you as a committee to weigh those different issues together, but as officers, we've advised you refuse this on the basis that it is development in a market dwelling in the countryside without adequate justification. So I'll leave it at that, but just wanted to make that clear. Thank you.
Thank you. Like many others, this is a really hard decision because yeah, it's not good to go against the officers' recommendations. So it's our job to sort of weigh up everything that's involved. But I am really struggling. We're trying to come to a decision on this, but I think that there is too much going against it. We've been presented with cases before that have been building in the countryside and we've refused them. I don't really see this is any different. So at the moment, I'm leaning on the side of agreeing with the officers. Yes.
I'll just add one thing to what Mr. Lyon said, which I agree with entirely. A couple of people, and indeed the report, refers to issues of 5-year, 4-year, whatever you want to call it, land supply here. And the report acknowledges that we're deficient in that factor, which is a material consideration in favour of this proposal. Having said that, that doesn't override our policy position that Mr. Lyon has set out. And slightly to my surprise, we do have a very strong track record on appeal of continuing to win despite the 5-year land supply issues on single homes in the countryside, because inspectors tend to take the view that one house in itself doesn't make a particular difference to the overall statistical position. So whilst it is in favour, I would personally suggest it should carry little weight in the balance of consideration for you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I join the chorus of congratulation to the speakers, and I think Councillor Ringer has represented the applicant with some skill and professionalism in his address to the committee. I think we seem to be having repeatedly the issue of the challenge by, let's face it, let's be honest, by nutrient neutrality problems presented to us by government on our 5-year land supply. So that pressure I would see as temporary, but we are where we are with it. But I don't think that is a wrecking ball for our policies. I think our policies still apply. I think I agree that to approve this and not accept the officer's recommendation would be uncomfortable for this committee, given the decision in the previous application we've dealt with this morning. We have 2 appeal decisions here, which are not High Court decisions, so they're not sort of legal precedents, but they are persuasive in themselves. And I think, unfortunately, I am persuaded by those and other elements of this, which I don't think individually or cumulatively amount to sufficient material considerations to outweigh the contravention of policy SS1. And I, with a heavy heart, really, because I do feel for the applicants in this situation. You look at your own land and there's a natural inclination, regardless of planning, there's a natural human inclination to think, you know, this is my castle, I can do something with it, and to be stymied if we do accept the officer's recommendation today is a bitter pill for the applicant to swallow, and I have a lot of sympathy in that regard. But I will be supporting the recommendation to accept the officer's refusal on this application, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. I think at this point, we will go to a vote. The recommendation is refusal on the grounds set out, proposed. That we accept that by Councillor Fitch-Tillett, seconded by Councillor Kim Toy. Take a vote, please, Lauren.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Brown,
For.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett,
For.
Councillor Hankins, Councillor Heinrich,
For.
Councillor Holiday, Councillor Mancini Boyle, Councillor Neverway, Councillor Ringer, Councillor John Toy,
Against.
Councillor Kim Toy, for, Councillor Varley, and Councillor Vickers.
Reluctantly against, and I think the same brow furrowing consideration should have been given to the previous case that has been given to this. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Brown.
So that is 7 votes for, 4 votes against, and 1 abstention. The officer's recommendation is carried.
The application is refused. We can now move on to agenda item 10. Another one in line next to C, PF 240747, in a very familiar location. Start when you're ready, Jeremy. When you're ready.
Morning, everybody. This application is for a site at Cooks Marsh in Clyde next to Sea. It may be familiar. The site was brought to committee last month. The application proposes 3 windows within the western elevation of the building. I'd like to add at this early stage is that the building has permission as a use as a hotel and guest house. Now, this isn't under consideration, but just to make it clear that the building was under Class R of Schedule 2 of Part 3 of the GDPO, allows buildings under 150 square metres to be change of use from what is agricultural to a guest house. So, however, under the Class R, which is not under consideration, it doesn't allow for operational changes to the building. So therefore, we have application for the insertion of 3 windows within its west elevation. And this is the only thing that we are considering here today. In terms of its site's location, it's located off the west side of Holt Road in Clyde, and what is currently sort of a water meadow and agricultural setting. And the site location plan is a little bit clear. It shows relationship with Holt Road along the access track as well. And the application site is within red. Now the aerial photo is better. It shows relationship. Again, it's more apparent. It shows agricultural buildings to the west of the site, and the access road, it's quite a long access road from Holt Road. It also sort of shows there's vegetation to the north, or mature vegetation trees, also to the south, and again, the agricultural buildings, which is a sort of a current farm holding to the west. In terms of existing plans, I've shown them all, but the west elevation is clear. What you've got is no elevational openings to the west as present form. There are other openings in the building which will be reused, and again, are not up for consideration today. What we've got on the west elevation is 3 door-sized glazed openings proposed. Again, the other openings are not for consideration. I have shown the floor plan. It just shows these windows, well, door opening size windows will facilitate 3 bedrooms for the proposed guest house. In terms of photos, I'll just go through a series of photos just to show in terms of the site context. The first one is the view from the access road, which shows its east elevation. Got a slightly closer view. Again, this is the north and east elevation of the building, which is viewable from the Holt Road. This is the north and the west. The west elevation, which is the long elevation, which will have the windows inserted into, and this faces a hedgerow and the agricultural buildings just behind it. Again, this is a sort of a closer view of the west elevation, which you can see the hedgerow on the right. I have inserted this next to this photo and the photo after. This is from the coast path, which you can see the building just sort of with the roofscape there. And the next, thank you. And the next, I've just done a closer view if you zoom in. So you can see the building and you can see the north elevation and slight northwesterly tip of the building. So there is some oblique views from the coast path. This is from the north east along the Holt Road. Again, you don't see the western elevation of the building. So essentially, just to sort of summarise there, the views of the western elevation where the proposed openings are being inserted is negligible. You don't see these from a principal elevation at all. In terms of main considerations, obviously we've got the principal development. The primary ones considering is the impact on the Norfolk coast natural landscape and the Glaven Valley and the Clyde Conservation Area. In terms of the sort of officer report and the consultation responses, we have no overriding objections from the landscape officer or the conservation design officer. In terms of officer opinion, we have accepted that there'll be some increased light spill resulting from these three openings. However, whilst it could increase the nocturnal visibility of the building within the open undeveloped landscape and the conservation area, given the limited views available, including intervening features, and the use of the 0.65 VLT glass, which is assist in mitigating light spill, which the agent has also confirmed that they're happy to use a condition to be imposed upon the application. Officers do not consider an objection on the grounds of landscape and visual impact or harm to the conservation area, difficult to sustain an objection. So the officer recommendations are balanced judgment in line with local and national policies, and this is in the office report. In terms of recommendation, we approve based on conditions of time limit, approved plans and the use of 0.65 VLT glazing. Thank you.
Thank you. We have no parish speaker, no objecting speaker, no supporting speaker. Over to you, Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Chair. You may wonder why a planning application for 3 windows has been brought to the Development Committee. According to the proposed new call-in procedure for Development Committee, I would suggest this application falls within 3 of the 4 possible reasons for a call-in. This application is in a particularly sensitive location from a landscape standpoint, and allowing it could have significant impacts or set a precedent. There are 11 objections from the community, plus that of the parish council. I do not agree with the planning officer's conclusions, which I think give insufficient weight to heritage and landscape impact. The points I wish to make today concern consistency and the cumulative impact of development. Regarding consistency, it appears from case law that when there has been a previous decision to grant or refuse permission in respect of the same site, it is capable of being a material consideration in a later decision. And if the decision maker is minded to depart from the previous decision, they have to explain the reasons for the departure. I quote, "One important reason why previous decisions are capable of being material is that like cases should be decided in a like manner, so there is consistency." There have been 2 previous planning applications, one withdrawn and one refused. The latter proposed windows and rendered walls. In this case, the landscape officer considered that the increased animation of the building and its increasingly suburbanized appearance would divorce it from its agrarian function and setting. The planning officer thought the changes proposed would adversely impact the AONB landscape and the Glaven Valley Conservation Area. This application was refused in May 23. So previously, officers considered windows would fundamentally alter the appearance of the building. Why is this no longer the case? The mitigation offered of reduced visible light transmission glass of less than 0.65, which seems to have moved the dial, will still allow 0.35 visible light transmission, which will animate the building and have an adverse effect on the AONB Treasure's dark skies. We haven't mentioned also on the north elevation, what used to be a wooden door is now going to be a glass panel. And no mention has been made of that, though that's obviously, that is a very obvious elevation of the building and a point of light spill. My other point is the cumulative effect of development as touched on above. Why isn't this being considered? According to the Landscape Institute and the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, cumulative effects can be defined as impacts that result from incremental changes caused by other past, present, or reasonably foreseeable actions. Cumulative effects include the incremental change as a result of individual developments such that the combined landscape and visual effect is significant, even if the individual effects may not be. It's obvious that these recurrent applications are making incremental changes to the barn's appearance and to the Glaven Valley Conservation Area and AONB. So for reasons of consistency and cumulative impact, I ask you to reject the officer's recommendation and refuse the application. Thank you.
Thank you. Officers wish to add anything at this point? No? Okay, members. Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to give my thanks to the officer for her thorough report. Although I do appreciate the local members' comments and concerns, I think, you know, just going off the actual report, notably the fact that the landscape officer and the conservation and design officer have no objection, I'm really struggling to understand why we would, as a committee, object and go against officer's recommendation of approval. Certainly, it's encouraging to note that the applicant is happy with the condition of the BLT glass. I think that's a very good condition. So I'm more than happy to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, councillor. Angie, councillor Stewart.
Yeah, a question. I'm sorry, I'm still weighing up my decision. I see in here there is a mention of flood risk. Can somebody please give me the areas that could in fact be flooded? Because I know originally this area was in fact part of Clyde Harbour.
Thank you. Yeah, the whole site was located in flood zone 3B. But this all stems back to the issue with the Class R and the notification process of the conversion under 150 square metres. If the building was over 150 square metres under the prior notification scheme, the council would have had to consider contamination, highways, flood risk, all the things that we normally would consider under the kind of the prior notification route in terms of conversions, a bit like the class Qs that we see. Because the building is under 150 square metres, which was historically been deemed through enforcement case, except by the local planning authority, all those issues are not for consideration. So they can change the use of the building subject to obviously planning permission, which require planning permission, such as insertion of windows, insertion of doors, depending what a person is applying for. But flood risk, whilst it is located in a flood zone 3B, is not a consideration at this time because of the size of the building and how it sits within the GDPO.
I find that quite extraordinary, Mr. Chairman, to put visitors in a hotel guest house where they might get flooded. And I do so hope that I realise this is a previous decision, but flood prevention measures have actually been included in the approval. I remain unconvinced about this. I think there is always going to be damage to the national, is it the Norfolk National Landscape as it's now called, as opposed to the AONB, and the dark skies area. So I think I will refuse this one.
Councillor John Toy.
Yeah, thank you. Whilst there would be, you know, for many of us, the concerns about the flooding and things, that's not what we're here for today, which is always difficult when we're asked to decide on one thing and we can see other stuff. In terms of the light, was there not loads of Velux roof lights in the building anyhow already on that same side? Did I see them in the pictures?
Yeah, that's subject to a certificate of lawfulness that's already been determined.
Okay, okay, because you know, it seems to put visible light transmission restrictions on those, and yet it can always shine in at the roof. Kind of seems almost a wasted effort, really. But it's good that we do it. And also in terms of the impact on the area, I think the fact that it becomes a guest house with people coming and going and noise and activity is more likely to do damage than putting a few windows in. So I think yeah, I think the officers come to the right conclusion. Have we been proposed yet, Mr. Chair?
Been proposed, you get
I'll
a second.
second. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? In which case, Lauren, come and go to a vote.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Brown,
For,
Councillor Fitch-Tillett,
Against.
Councillor Hankins, Councillor Heinrich,
For,
Councillor Holiday, Councillor Mancini Boyle, Councillor Nevoy, Councillor Ringer,
For,
Councillor John Toy,
for,
Councillor Kim Toy, 4, Councillor Varley, and Councillor Vickers.
Abstain.
That is 9 votes for, 1 against and 2 abstentions. The officer's recommendation is carried.
thank you. Would members like a short break now or carry on? We've got a few issues to discuss after we finish with the applications. So, some for break, yes, 10 minutes. Bring your coffee back here, please, if you've been queuing up. So let us continue. We now come to agenda item 11, Dillham/PF/21/1479, conversion of agricultural building to holiday accommodation within an existing complex. Russell, when you're ready.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this application has been with us for a while. And it's sort of the main reason it's been held up is due to nutrient neutrality, which we'll hit on a bit later on. But just to draw attention to the fact that this application is now part retrospective and is set out on pages 95 and 96 of the agenda. The list of the works that have been carried out to the building already are set out there. The reason that it's before you today is due to two reasons. Request to Councillor Dixon and his concerns related to environmental harms, the fact that the site lies in an unsustainable location, and he also raised concerns in relating to highway safety. The second reason is that the applicant is a member of this council, so there's a requirement to bring it to committee for decision. Just going quickly through the issues. In terms of principle, it's an existing building. If we start going through, for you can see there, it's an existing agricultural building, and the policies in our local plan support the reuse of those buildings for appropriate purposes. As being proposed here is tourist accommodation, so it's a 4-bed tourist property. So in principle, it's supported. In terms of landscape impacts and design, there's no concerns in relation to those issues. Amenity-wise, as a holiday let, we've considered it acceptable. As a dwelling, if it was a sort of a market dwelling, then there would be issues given the sort of proximity to other buildings and the size of the external amenity space proposed. But there's conditions that would secure its use as a holiday let, so that's been addressed. In terms of biodiversity, we'll move sort of on to the nutrient neutrality, and I'll give you a quick overview as to what's happened. So a couple of iterations of schemes have come forward to try and address nutrient neutrality because the site itself would be introducing additional nutrients into the catchment. And finally, we've got to a position where their applicant is proposing to upgrade a septic tank, another property that they own in the village, which would provide the mitigation necessary for the additional loads that would be generated from this property. So we've looked through that and we've consulted with Natural England, and we're content that we can secure that mitigation through legal agreement, and that would make the development nutrient neutral. In terms of GI RAMs, just a quick mention that in addition to the sort of tariff payment that's sort of common for new dwellings and accommodation, this site lies in quite close proximity to protected sites, the Broadfen SSSI, which is sort of component parts of the wider Broads SAC and SPA. So as part of that, mitigation measures are required, and they form they're in the form of guidance that would be provided to occupiers of the holiday accommodation, as well as signage at the site boundaries, the SSSI site boundaries themselves. So that's also secured. In terms of highways, there's no objection from the Highway Authority. The existing use would have generated a degree of movements, and the proposal isn't considered to be significantly harmful in terms of that. So the recommendation is to approve, subject to a legal agreement securing the mitigation measures, as I mentioned there, in terms of nutrient neutrality, along with the conditions that are listed on pages 105 and 106 of the agenda. We just quickly go through some of the plans. So you can see there's the floor plans, the proposed floor plans there, the building being sort of subdivided to create those units. Elevations of the external works that are being done to convert the building. There is a genuine, they are generally trying to use the existing openings, which is seen as a positive, so that So these are the photos of the barn prior to the works being carried out. And this is the barn, photos taken recently with those works that are listed in the report having been undertaken. I just mentioned in terms of the roof, the works to the roof, there were bats found and the works had been undertaken in accordance with the Natural England licence that was granted. So our ecologist doesn't have any concern with that. It was done in accordance with the licence. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you. Chairman.
Thank you. I have no parish speaker, no objecting speaker, one supporting speaker, Mr. Bootman. In case comes to the microphone front. We're intrigued by now. You have 3 minutes. Time you start.
Thank you. So I think the planning position has been comprehensively assessed within the officer's report and presentation, and I welcome the recommendation to approve. So that being the case, I've just got a couple of points I'd like to run through. As members have heard, this is a policy compliance scheme which would sensitively preserve a good quality barn, and through provision of new short stay holiday accommodation will provide economic benefit to the local area. As described in the report, this is a location where there is already a degree of tourism activity, and this development would complement the existing holiday accommodation, canoe hire, etc. that occurs in and around this site. The applicant would like to apologise for the application being in part retrospective. This arose mostly as the determination period has been so long. We're currently at just over 3 years to get to this point now. And there was a need to carry out some repairs to the roof and progress some contractors who had been instructed shortly before the site was caught by the issue of nutrient neutrality. Turning finally to the issue of nutrient neutrality, I'd like to thank officers for working with us to unlock this development. The solution proposed, replacement of a septic tank, is a tried and tested method, and it will ensure that this development will achieve nutrient neutrality. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Mancini-Ball, are you speaking as a local member?
Yes, I'll have a go, basically. I didn't know I was going to have to say anything because I didn't call this application in. My fellow councillor, Councillor Dixon did, and I'm slightly disappointed not to see a report. However, I will try my best. As I mentioned in the beginning, I have met with the applicant maybe over a year ago, who showed me his proposed plans. He wasn't a member at the time, and I gave no advice and no comment at all. So, but I've looked at the application, and pretty much, if I just draw your attention to page 94, 97, beg your pardon. One of the problems seems to be is the highways, the vehicle movement. Now, if I go through the consultations, Dillon Parish Council have raised this issue, but as you go through the different consultations, NNDC Conservation and Design, no objection. NNDC Landscape, no objection. NND Environmental Health, no objection. Norfolk County Highways, crucially, no objection. Norfolk County Public Right-of-Way Green Infrastructure, no objection. And crucially, as the officer has pointed out, Natural England has no objections subject to mitigation being secured. Representations, there are concerns about dark skies, and I would like to propose we put a condition on the application that this is looked at with the officers to try and address the lighting within the building, because we've had this before quite easily to mitigate this. And I'm sure if we could put a condition in that this is addressed, or even a consultation with the officer, I'd be quite happy with that. I'm not going to go any further because, quite frankly, I'd sort of listen to what other people have to say, but I am going to vote at the end of it all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, so to declare that you're not proposing. No, I'm coming back to the condition you were indicating.
Chairman, sorry, can I just get some clarity on that? In terms of lighting, there is condition 4, which would be looking to secure no external lighting without prior consent. Are you referring to, is that what you're referring to? So you're also referring to sort of internal lighting as well? Okay. Okay, well, that's something that we can consider. I'm mindful that the works have already been undertaken to the roof with the roof lights. Okay. Yeah, you're referring to VLT, yeah, okay.
Is that possible? Do we need to formally?
I think, well, yeah, that's certainly possible. We can certainly look at that and discuss it with the applicant. Yeah. I think we just need to be clear. Are you proposing that you're happy to support the application with, provided that there's a condition securing BLT glazing?
Sorry, microphone.
What I'm saying is I would like this to, I don't want a condition, but I would like this to be looked into with the applicant to see if they could do something with regards to dog pollution.
Yeah. Councillor Hurley first then.
Sorry, I'm just going to add some clarity that we just request the normal reduced VLT as per the UK Dark Skies Partnership guidelines. And that does actually apply to roof lights, unfortunately, as well. But obviously, if they've been built already, that's a bit of a problem, but certainly for the vertical glazing. Thank you.
So you're formally proposing that we should add a condition, should we approve? Are we Angie,
I'm happy to second that, providing that there is no light spill from the building in the future.
So can I just clarify just for a second? So Mr. Stock has already confirmed condition 4, I think he said, which is the external lighting part. As I understand it, which has now been proposed and seconded, if approved, there would be an additional condition that would relate to the normal glazing kind of condition for any glazing added from now on, or from all the glazing, because as Mr. Stock has already implied, there is some already installed, hence the retrospective bit, which might be additionally difficult, shall we say, to retrofit. So bluntly, do you want the applicant to have to take all the existing glazing he's putting out and put in higher quality stuff, or is it just the new stuff? Because we do need to be precise on this, because the condition has to be precise. I don't have a particular view, just want you to be clear.
Well, I think we would like no spill whatsoever, including to the retrofit.
I'll take advice on how difficult that might be to secure. I mean, I think new glazing would be a reasonable condition, but I'm not so sure about things that have already had considerable money spent on them. Hang on, I've got a lot of people here now. We'll park that for a minute. Councillor Vickers, then.
No, I'm sorry, Chairman, I'm not parking. I was just saying I agree with you absolutely for retrofitting. I think the expense and difficulty that would cause, and I would hope that this could just be an informal condition for discussion with the applicant.
Well, I don't know, should we consider a certificate of lawfulness for the glazing that's already been installed, and then with LVT 0.65 like we did on the previous application?
So can I say what I said in a different way? Okay. You got one of 3 options. Okay, either there is no additional condition whatsoever to what is in the report. Okay, secondly, there is an additional condition like the previous application in Cly that talks about the LVT glazing that relates to any window installed from now on, if I simplify it to that. Thirdly, there is that LVT condition related to every bit of glazing on the building, whether installed already or not. Clearly, the applicant, I'm sure, would prefer the first one and probably dislike the third one, because I would if I was them, because retrofitting won't be easy and will come with cost. But it is your decision. It's not difficult for us to write any of the conditions. Enforcing the third one might be a bit of a challenge over time, but that's where we are. So take your pick, bluntly. And Mr. Stock looks like he's going to put a more refined version than that.
No, I agree with the other Russell. Just to draw members' attention to, you might remember last year in September time, we brought an application for the adjoining building, which is going to be a swimming pool. And just to let you know that there was no conditions about VLT glazing on that building, which we will have a degree of light spill in that area anyway. So it might be part of your considerations as to what level of condition you might want to look for on this.
I'm not going to let you off the hook, I'm afraid, Russell, or the planners on that on that issue. Can I ask why in the application in September of last year for the swimming pool there wasn't a condition for light spill, similar to what we have now?
Yeah, it wasn't considered necessary to make it acceptable, and that application was before committee, so it was decided by members, and it wasn't deemed necessary to make the development acceptable.
But it wasn't even in the report for members to consider last September. Is that the case?
I can't remember, to be all honesty. It was a while ago, but it's something to be mindful of. But yeah.
Can I thank the Assistant Director for planning for his clarity?
Can I just?
Yes. Thank you very much.
I think we need to be careful. I mean, we're obviously raising an issue that obviously wasn't an issue when we dealt with the previous building next door, and I think that's probably because it's not in the A and B or somewhere where. I mean, we know lots of examples in the A and B where there's been sensitivity about the nocturnal character of the area. I don't think that sensitivity was quite the issue on this site when it was considered previously on the building next door. Obviously, it's a matter for you as a committee whether you've changed your view on that sensitivity, but obviously we need to be reasonable and proportionate in terms of asking for conditions. Now, you've gone through the various range of options. Obviously, you can always, if you're not seeking a formal condition, you can always impose a note, or I'll put a note on a decision notice advising the applicant that they consider VLT glazing. Clearly, it's not an enforceable note, but that's if members want to make the applicant aware that that's what they would prefer them to do without having to go through that process of having to enforce, then that's one route. But I'll leave it at that.
I have to say that sounds to me a reasonable way forward in this case, given that there's no condition on the
I'm happy to.
Jason Barn. Okay, so that is a note that will be added to the, and it's not a formal condition. Right, so if we can add that on the end, now, if we can get back to the substantive. If we have any further discussion, I kind of have a proposer and seconder, given this would otherwise be an offer of the recommendation were it not an application by a member. I'll take Adam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say thank you to the officer for the report, as always. I think this is quite an encouraging, positive application. It would certainly help with diversification, which as a council we are encouraging. Certainly agricultural businesses, there is that need to diversify. It would also benefit the local economy as well, and it's in an area of the Norfolk Broads, so it'll really benefit what's already to offer. All of that considered, I'm more than happy to propose the officer's recommendation for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Callum.
I think Councillor Valia said all that I would say myself, other than I'm happy to second that proposal.
Councillor Holiday, then Councillor Brown, then we go to a
I'm
vote.
just going back to the minutes actually of that meeting in September, and it was actually raised that we should use smart glass. And it was me actually, and we thought there'd be a lot of light pollution. And we asked for smart glass to be incorporated. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I gather that there was no formal condition added at that point. If you want light pollution there, go down into the main village of the pub and sit in the garden. There's plenty of light pollution there. So, okay. Andrew, do you want to very quickly?
Yeah, very quickly. I'm just surprised that this has been called in by Councillor Dixon as a county councillor and his own highway authority. Have no concerns about highways, and it doesn't seem to have a grasp of what paragraph 115 of the MPPF really means in terms of, you know, the impact has to be severe, and it clearly isn't. Otherwise, I'm sure the Highway Authority would have picked up on that, Mr. Chairman. So, but I'm very happy to support this and would have seconded it.
So,
Councillor Rungan up.
My knowledge of that area, and I grew up not far away. The only traffic issue there is the Honing end of that road, where there's a very narrow old canal bridge and railway bridge. And most traffic will come in from the Yarmouth Road. Not.
I mean, just to be fair to Councillor Dixon, who isn't here to explain obviously why he called it in, I believe he called it in before Luke Patterson became a district council member. So the fact that Mr. Patterson is a district council member, it means it automatically has to come before committee for decision anyway. So obviously, given the length of time it's been with us, obviously things have changed over that time, and the original reason for refusal has been replaced by the other bit of the constitution.
Just, sorry, Chairman, just to clarify as well, this was one of 3 applications that were submitted at the same time, and it was Councillor Dixon's request that they all came to committee. So it was the cumulative impact.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of that, so I'll withdraw that comment in that case. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Brown?
4.
Councillor Fitch-Tillett?
4.
Councillor Hankins? Councillor Heinrich?
4.
Councillor Holiday? Councillor Mancini Boyle?
4.
Councillor Neville? Councillor Ringer?
4.
Councillor John Toy?
4.
Councillor Kim Toy?
4.
Councillor Varley? And Councillor Vickers? 4. That is unanimous, 12 votes for.
Thank you. Well, that concludes the applications. If we now move to the remainder of the agenda. Item 12, Development Management Performance Updates.
I've just got to go to do something. I to apologise and leave, but I've got no comments on the Section 106 agreement before I go. There were 3 that actually were started and completed between the committees, so they won't appear on them. And one was the West Raynham Auto Clinic Section 106 agreement. So I'm pleased that we're down to quite a few, and the Bacton one is actually being signed at the moment. So that's all I've got to say on the 106s. And please excuse me, I've just got to go somewhere. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just keep this brief. So we're just sort of again pointing out the sort of performance. This is for the period of May 2024, so up to the 31st of May this year, which seems a long time ago, but that's the last date we've had for the data. So performance has been good again. So we've had 97% of non-majors within time, 2 out of time within that period, and 5 major decisions all within time. So our 24-month performance, which is what the government assesses against, still at 100% for majors. And we've got up to 96% for non-majors. So that puts us in the sort of high echelons of performance across the country. In terms of our quality, so in terms of the number of appeals that have been allowed, so that figure has gone up slightly for non-majors, which is why we've got the unfortunate red graph there in terms of if you've got a colour version of the document. But as you'll probably see further on the agenda, we've had another 5 appeal decisions that have all been dismissed. So that will probably change that figure to a green the next time you see it. But yeah, so performance is doing generally okay. Just take any questions or comments.
Thank you. Councillor Mancini Boyle.
Very briefly, congratulations yet again on your performance, and also my inbox is drastically empty. Normally I get the odd one here and there, so clearly the quality of the work you're doing is reflected in my happy residents, so thank you for that.
Good to know. Any further comments on that?
Long may it continue, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, if you can then move to agenda item 13. Appeals.
So you're probably thinking, oh, things look a little bit different on this agenda. So we've slightly sort of formatted the way that we present appeal cases. So the first pages 111 to 113 have got the planning appeals, and 115 and 116 have the what we call it sort of issues. So they're set out on there. Happy to take any questions. We've had a few new appeals come in on the planning side of things, and you've probably noticed on page 113 the planning inspectorate have also been busy, and they've managed to issue 5 decisions for us that you can see on there. I'm sure you can see they've all been dismissed, so either the decision of the committee or officers delegated decisions have all been backed by the planning inspectorate, so that sort of reinforces the quality of decisions that we're making as a council.
Yeah, certainly good news. Let's show we are getting it right. Interesting looking at the Great Snoring one. That was a self-build. It's a lesson the two with this morning, I think. Other than that, just do wonder how we're going to get any broadband on our phones if we keep dismissing it. The inspector agreed with long lead and masts, but there we go. Yeah, we don't want that massive one in there. But we need to resolve that, because we all know the phone system around here is pretty dull. Pardon? Very odd trees. Yeah.
Yes, I did have one when I worked in an authority in Essex, and I still go by there on the train line, look at it, think, oh, that's not really a tree, is it? So you have it depends on your view in life. I mean, it is what it is, isn't it? A steel structure is a steel structure. You know, it's a mobile phone mast. If it's artificially pretending to be a tree, you think, what the heck is that? It almost looks more jarring than it's a personal judgment, but yeah. I don't think we'll have many trees in our district.
Is that the species of tree that goes by the nickname sore thumb?
Just
I think it's that. I think at that point, unless there are any more queries.
Just briefly, it's about strategy. There is no strategy, and there is no real shared rural network. If we had a proper shared rural network, we'd need less masts. And there is no strategy as to it's done piecemeal by different companies. So that's what needs addressing, and that's what I'm trying to work on. But they keep going, oh, well, that's commercially sensitive because they're all in competition. But anyhow, I'll not bore you with that any further. It's an interesting challenge.
Same as applying to fibre networks. Everybody seems to be digging the roads up and trying to offer you an overpriced service. But okay, so the last thing is the various changes to the way in which we operate, as outlined in item 14. So I'll hand over to Russell for that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to endeavour to do this in 2 parts, so stop halfway through, having liaised with the Chair. So stop after paragraph 11 effectively, and do the stuff at the start and the training bit, and then move on to the call-in bit second up. So just to rewind in history a little bit, and apologies for those that know every last bit of this before I say it, but some years ago you instigated as councillors a review of the planning service, and that led to a planning service improvement plan going via various places, but particularly overview and scrutiny committee. Happened to be finalised in the month I started here, sort of 18 months ago, and we've been beavering away at that ever since, fitting it around other bits of workload, and it's coming to a point where it is now concluded. and concluding it remains a commitment within the corporate plan that was agreed some months ago. Over the next month or two, you will get stuff that relates to the points, or at least 4, if not 5 of the points in paragraph 3. So you've just had a discussion on performance indicators. At the moment, actually, we don't measure that much and report it publicly on that much. So misquoting Councillor Mancini-Boyle slightly, there's nothing in our performance about what people think of our service in that regard, how many complaints we get in, where the local plan is, how many neighbourhood plans we might have got adopted, etc., etc. It's a little bit limited, and that's not meaning they don't have value in themselves, to 2 or 3 of the government's headline things. So we're working on, and we're basically more or less at the finish line, a new set of performance indicators. But before we start measuring them, I want to bring them here for you to say, and what about X? We think that's really important as well. So I'm reasonably confident number 1 will come before you as a draft set next month here. I'm reasonably confident that we will pitch a new pre-application planning advice service to you in the next month or 2 as well. Mr. Lyon and I have been having quite a bit of dialogue with some of our local agents and developers to understand actually from their perspective what is important, what would they like us to see? Because if I'm honest, our current service is not brilliant and we don't deliver it particularly brilliantly, in part because we're not measured against it bluntly in that regard. So that's on its way, as is a draft local validation list, which Mr. Lyon is working on, which we will need to consult on, which is, broadly speaking, I paraphrase, for all the applications we've had today, making it really, really, really clear what people need to submit when they submit the application. So for sake of picking on, one, the one at Cly as an example, would that need any kind of flood risk assessment up front? Well, bluntly, we shouldn't get 10 weeks into looking at the application and then decide it does. We should decide that and be very clear on it at the start. So that's effectively what that is about. But the rules require us to consult on that before we adopt it. And I think there are something here that we are operating within a national framework. So I'm not going to misquote Mr. Lyon too much, but I think both his and my view is it would be easier for the system if there was effectively a national validation list. And what North Norfolk does isn't particularly different from what anywhere else does, but that isn't the case. It sits at the local level at this point, which does irritate some of our agents who interrelate with a number of councils, and everywhere they go is different, but it is what it is. We're also redrafting, this is probably less relevant for committee, but the standard set of conditions. So when I get to issue a decision, it's darn sight easier if I know I've got to write a condition about materials, if we've got a standard one that I can just bluntly cut and paste in a high-tech way, rather than I've got to think, what do I actually want to say each time? And we have that, but we're updating it at the moment. And then finally, there's a piece of work going on around the Constitution. I'm sure councillors know and love our Constitution, and it features very prominently at your bedtime reading kind of thing. But currently, the Constitution has 3 different bits related to planning, and personal view, none of them are perfect. So there's a bit which is around delegations to committee. So what do you get to decide? Okay. There's a bit that's about delegations to Martin Fulcher as director. What can Martin decide via delegation? And they're page 73 to 74 and page whatever it is, 90 to 92. And then somewhere at the back, there's about 9 pages from 138 called the Planning Code, which tells effectively you how you are supposed to operate. And I'm not wanting a show of hands, but if you haven't read it recently, I would go and have a quick butchers at it. It does talk about predetermination, how you might deal with lobbying. You referred to lobbying earlier, and it could do with a little bit of work. So we've been working at the 3 of them with a view of updating them. They will all need to go via Constitution sort of working arrangements here, but I think our view is it would be helpful to get the committee's view as well. So at some point in the next couple of cycles, we'll have discussion as to what they say, how we suggest they might be amended, and I'll give you one example in a second. And then that view can be informed into the process, but it will end up at council somewhere. There is a bigger review of the whole constitution going on, but the monitoring officer is comfortable that the planning bit can be cut out separately, effectively, and updated separately from the rest. One example, so Mr. Fulcher technically, and I'm going to make up one number here, could determine under delegation a planning application that covered 1,000 hectares and 10,000 homes. There's nothing to stop him in the constitution determining that. But if he wants to determine a solar farm that's more than half a hectare, he can't in that, guys. And that was introduced at the time when solar farms were a relatively new thing. In that, guys, probably at about the time when Mr. Lyon was approving his tree back in Essex, somewhere in that regard, in that, guys. But there are a few sort of anomalies in there, so we will bring that back to you in due course. But there's just two, and I would say they're quite simple, but I know they're not, bits that we've got for you to think about and input into today. So one relates to training, which is paragraphs 6 to 11. The code I referred to already says effectively two things. Anybody on committee or a substitute on committee should have planning training before they take part in committee, and then goes on to say at the end, and bluntly, we'll probably organise all sorts of other training. It'd be a bright idea if you turn up because you'll learn something. Doesn't quite say that, but that's the gist of what it says. And the Planning Service Improvement Plan talks about planning training. And I've had a number of discussions with, I again take Mr. Lyon's name in vain here slightly, Mr. Lyon, who thinks he could plot a training programme that drags you into the building for 7 hours a week for the next 20 years. So you learn every component of the GDPO, which is a nightmare document. And then I've said that to Councillor Brown, who looks slightly horrified at the thought of 7 hours of training every week with Mr. Lyon. Or
that's for 8.
Yeah, he was advocating for 8. But in some discussion, we thought there are two different types of training that would be helpful for councillors. One is to help you as decision makers within this committee. Okay, and secondly is to help you and the other 30-ish in planning more generally. Okay, so the proposal here is, and this is a sort of balance between realism and idealism, I suppose, in that regard, is that we try and lay on 4 sessions a year, okay, 2 of which are sort of targeted at you and your people who aren't here, and 2 of which that are targeted at all 40. Not to say we're going to be invite only, but you know, that's the general take. And there probably is a advantage in having some of them in person and some of them virtually. The one that Mr. Fulcher and I did, compared by Councillor Brown on nutrient neutrality a couple of months back, you know, had a decent attendance, and from what Ms. Gregory told me, seemed to be relatively well received. So a couple of sort of lunchtime-ish sessions on relevant topics, and then a couple probably using the reserve date, and then bluntly, if the reserve date gets used by applications, then we think about it again for in-person stuff with, and there's no perfect way of doing this, with me being the kind of the decider as to what you get trained on, but clearly taking your view as to what might be useful. And equally, I wouldn't want to try and map out the whole year now, because something will come up that becomes more pertinent. Yeah. Crudely, there's going to need to be something at some point as to what does the new local plan say. As an example, there might need to be something as to how do we weigh that new local plan versus the old one in the tricky last few months. I don't care. So that is the proposal. We can kind of do it. It doesn't need a decision per se, but I'd be interested in wider views. I'm not going to die in a ditch if you all think that's daft and come up with something else. We'll implement whatever the outcome of the next bit of the debate gets us to, Chair. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Comments, members? Councillor Toy.
So yeah, training which we're doing at the moment, always a good idea. We did used to get regular training. Sometimes it would be if we had a fairly light meeting, we do a bit at the end. Yeah, I fully support whatever's going to work best for the team and to get the maximum engagement from councillors. So yeah, I welcome you bringing this forward and let's get it done. That's what I say. Thank you.
Anybody else? No? Carry on or something?
I'll move on whilst I'm winning. Okay. Next one's probably slightly more tricky in a sense. So there's a couple of bits here, and then I'll come on to what it says, and then I've got a slight correction to make in terms of process. But broadly, you all roughly know how we operate the call-in process, and roughly know, I suspect, how things end up on committee and how they don't. But even today, we've had I'm not meaning it critically of individuals, a couple of examples of not quite sure, didn't know, etc. Councillor John Toy made an observation, wasn't quite sure this one was coming to committee, etc., etc. So we think it would be helpful and more transparent to have something relatively simple that whoever is causing the thing to come to committee has to fill in, and that we publish, and that we then put the relevant bits of it into the committee report, so it's beyond doubt. That would apply to you, it would apply to me, it would apply to whoever in that guise. And I'm very, very keen that we do that. I'm much more open-minded about what we actually ask by way of questions, but I'll come to that in a second. The second bit for me is it's really important, and I'm not going to pick on individuals, but I think there is one councillor in the room where this might have happened, that we try and minimise the chances of it going wrong somewhere, for sake of argument. I'll just pick on somebody I know fairly sure this hasn't happened with, Councillor Brown sending a request for a call in to somebody and it going awry, and then all of a sudden a delegated decision is issued. So I'd rather we all have to send it to a generic mailbox that is monitored by a number of people, and it reduces the chances of it getting lost, or I happen to miss Councillor Varley's email and then something goes pear-shaped, etc., etc. So that's part of the suggestion here. The other bit is, and I don't want to overcomplicate this, but I think when we are calling something in, we need to be reasonably clear what the planning grounds are for calling it in. But equally, that shouldn't require people to produce an essay, and it shouldn't automatically require people to say, I don't like it or I do like it. It's the planning reasons for the call in. So you've got effectively on the 2.5 page appendix a suggestion of a form there. Personally, I don't think it's complicated. We'll have to work out the ITE bit of it, but it isn't complicated. But then when when my officers send you something saying effectively, need to notify you because of X, Y, and Z, would you like to call this in? They'd attach the form and you'd have to fill it in if you wanted to and return it, or when you get your weekly notice and you want to call that one in, you'd have to fill it in. Personally, the interesting question, I suppose, is the one that I've called planning constitutional grounds for call-in. So take the last example, constitutional grounds for call-in last time would just be an applicant is a councillor, therefore it is. That's unlikely to ever change realistically, because those decisions should be made in whatever. But if it's the planning grounds for call-in, we then gave some thought as to what might be suitable and what might not be suitable, and there are 2 sets of bullet points on the last couple of slides which suggest some stuff that we think would be suitable that isn't an essay, and some stuff that we think wouldn't be suitable because it doesn't really include any planning grounds. And I'd certainly welcome views on that. Lauren's probably about to stick this up. There's one correction I've got to make, other than 2 spelling mistakes, which I have also spotted, which I apologise for. Having then had some subsequent to producing this discussions, and she's right, the monitoring officer has observed that that bit in yellow at the bottom arguably is a constitutional matter and should go before council to be decided. So I'll come back to what that means. But broadly, at the moment, the Constitution is ambiguously written, I think it would be fair to say, but equally says if Councillor Varley wants something called in, it gets called in, or any of you for that matter, irrespective of what his reasons are. He's got to write something, but there's no arbiter of does it make sense or not. Personally, I think we should have an arbiter as to does it make sense or not. And I'm suggesting here that that should be Mr. Fulcher with some kind of right of appeal to the monitoring officer to make the final decision. And realistically, they're both quite savvy. They're unlikely to be telling you that's inappropriate to the point where it would never get to committee. They might be saying, actually, you need to write a bit more on the item. But technically, that yellow bit needs a constitutional update, and therefore correspondingly, the bullet points at the tail end of the next page, which give examples as to what might not be suitable, arguably are part of that sort of constitutional bit. So having reflected on this and having agreed this with both Ms Gregory and the monitoring officer in the last 24 hours, personally, I would advocate that whatever you take the view, we can amend, but that we introduce we've got to fill in the form bit from the 1st of September, and the arbiter bit will come in as part of the constitutional package that I'll bring back to you at some point that will end up at council. So from the 1st of September, we've all got to fill in the same form, but we go with whatever everybody puts within the form. I think, Chair, that's all I want to say. Notice one or two stuck their hands up halfway through that, which is perfectly fair.
Thank you. Comments? Thank you.
Okay, happy with the form. I think that's good. I think if something's called in as well, we should have some representation if it's written. That has always been a challenge for this committee. If someone's called it in that there is no representation, then is the call-in still valid? You know, how we deal with that before the committee day is maybe a question, but I think if someone calls it in, then there should be more than they've just written down for their reason for calling it in. To give us better understanding so we can understand whether it's a valid point. So I don't have an issue with the form. My concern, and could I just ask you, you said that, because I tried to read actually through the constitution, sadly, but I did, and I'm trying to find the relevant points. But you said 73, 74, 90 to 92, and
138 to 146.
138 to 146.
It's confused by the fact, goes further, the contents page says it's page 120, but then when you look at 120, that's something else, and then you find it 130.
Yeah, I was struggling, and even with searching, trying to use the right words. However, thank you. It means I can go back and I'll review it daily. But I am concerned, and I need to read these to see what's in the constitution already. My concern is the democratic process. So at the moment, we give a delegated decision. Therefore, that suggests the decision is ours as members. And if we then get into a position where we're not allowed to make that decision and it can be overridden by an officer, have we taken away that democratic right? So I question that at this stage. And obviously it needs to be worked through the Constitution Working Party. And obviously I need to read to see what's there already. But that was my immediate feeling about that, is that it's not a delegated decision if that decision can be taken away from us. But I do think there is room for senior planning officers such as yourself to have robust discussions with members who want to call it in and to help shape their thoughts. And if there is a difficult message they need to take back as to why they're not calling it in, they're given assistance to do that. And part of that will come from the training that we've got planned as well. So yeah, as an initial kickoff, that was my initial thoughts when I went through it. But thank you for bringing it forward and bringing it to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kim Toy.
Right, thank you very much. The thought of more training is exciting. I've got a perverse interest in planning, so it doesn't bother me. But I do have a question. I have been contacted, I think at least twice, about being given
a delegated decision. But it always says in there, please contact me within 5 days. Is that a standard? Yeah. See, at this time of the year, that could be a problem. I love being a councillor, but I'm not 24/7, and I may be away like I have been recently. I do not have my emails. So what happens if I come back and find that? And yes, I do want to be involved in that, but I can't have access to that now because it's beyond the 5 days. I think there needs to be some sort of knowledge about whether that councillor is available. I always put an out of office on and what date I'm back if I'm away. But I think that needs to be carefully done because otherwise I could come back and find, oh, right, I've missed the deadline. Okay.
Angie?
Yeah, just a little bit concerned at the end of the document, reasons for calling. You've listed public interest. Well, quite often there is public interest, and I am aware that you need something else as well. But I do think calling should somehow include that, because we all know that we get huge representation sometimes locally for things that aren't too popular within the local residents.
Do you want to come back now, Russell?
Yeah, so if I can just make a few observations, and I'm sure Mr. Lyon might chip in, particularly if I forget something very obvious. So there's 3 bits there, or there's some bits there that I think actually relate to what I'm pitching today, and there's some bits that actually float into the area of the Constitution review, arguably. But I'm splitting them into 2 for a second. So what I'm pitching today, I don't think it would be difficult. If you would wish, it would be quite easy actually to amend the explanatory note bit to include something that says committee councillors will normally expect the councillor calling something in to appear or make some kind of submission to committee, but it does need to be an expectation than a requirement for a couple of reasons. One, bluntly, if it's a requirement, it would need to be in the Constitution, I would say. And secondly, a bit like Councillor Kimtoy's bit, there will be times where a councillor simply can't be here for perfectly valid reasons in that regard. So more than happy to add something to that effect, and equally more than happy to add something that implies that senior officers may at times go back to councillors and ask them to refine their reason bits to make it a bit better. I paraphrase, but that's the gist of it. Turning to the bits that are more constitutional, I suppose. It is a fact that every single planning decision that is issued is a decision of the council, whoever takes it. Okay, be that you, be that Martin, be that me, Jeff, Mr. Stock on behalf of Martin. So that's the first bit. It's also a fact that lots of councils do committee agenda preparation in completely different ways. Bluntly, my previous council, it was decided entirely by officers, and councillors had no right to call anything in that regard. I'm not saying that was right, it's just a demonstration that it is done differently, and there were clearer thresholds set that if it's above a certain scale, the expectation is it would go to committee, etc. Okay, so we're not looking to change the democratic right. We're looking to say, actually, we need to have decent reasons, including me, as to what might go to committee or not. I'll come back to 1 or 2 other bits. The other bit then is about level of public interest from my take. So there have been a few different versions of this, and there are different examples out there, other places where they put a number in. You've got to have at least 10 different, or whatever it might be, representations. Well, I think there is a slight concern that in some cases that just leads to kind of petitionitis or going and knocking on doors to generate stuff in that guise. But the third bullet point on the penultimate page, it does relate to a valid reason, being the level of public interest is so significant that it should be put before whatever, and then gives an implication that it should be from more than one address kind of thing. So there is something in that territory that I think is appropriate. Personally, I'd rather not set a number, I think, because it comes across too much as a target in that guise, but you can argue that differently. Coming to the final point, so the other bit is, at the moment, we operate two ways of giving councillors the chance to call something into committee. So one is at the start, that weekly email you get that says, this is what's in your patch, do you want to call any of that in? Not a, best of my knowledge, not a single councillor has called something in directly as that route. We've had one or two I might be interested in, but I want to see how things develop, what local opinion is, what statutory consultees are, what bluntly the officer's view is, because most of you, don't bother to call something in if it's just to agree with the officer's position to get it before committee. You've then got the challenge. So we've got this position where we invariably consult you at the end. If we're taking a different view than somebody important within the process, is when we consult you, the parish council, a statutory consultee, whatever, the public. And at that point, the applicant invariably knows we're at the end of the process and wants their decision. And more often than not, we're up against the end of our statutory time limits to determine the thing. So whilst I have quite a bit of sympathy with your, cheekily back in a sense, I might be away or I might not get to something in whatever the time period is, and the nods from the side of right, it is a working week, effectively. I don't think any officer would ever advocate, and I'm not saying councillors are, that it's an open-ended time period, because that's unrealistic. Equally, probably 9 times out of 10, before you disappear for a, let's just call it a 4-month cruise or something, and or 3-week cruise with councillors taking the Constitution to read as bedtime reading during that period, you've probably got some feel as to what applications are around in your patch that are causing public interest. So I think I'm reasonably comfortable with our process. Whether we need to get a bit cuter both ways on some of the communication around it, but actually in the Constitution at the moment, we don't have to write to you at the end of the process and give you 5 days. It's silent on that. That's something that preceded the Constitution that Jeff and his team have kept doing, because it seems a pragmatically, practically sensible bit. And I want to write that sensibly into the Constitution, which you will have plenty of time to have a debate on, both here and then through the various routes, hopefully without rambling more than I normally do. That's covered all the points that were raised to one degree or other. Mr. Lyon might wish to chip in on top, I don't know.
Add a bit to the details of what Councillor Kim Toy made about obviously being away and using out of office, because obviously the officers, if there's no out of office, they won't necessarily know that that member isn't away, and therefore they'll assume after 5 days they haven't heard anything, that there's no objection and are happy to make a delegated decision. So I suppose it's a matter for you as members in terms of how you manage your inbox in terms of putting those out of office messages. And if you are going to be away, I don't know whether someone could cover your patch while you're away, particularly for longer periods of time where you might need that cover, because otherwise officers can't move forward with decisions in your area, really. So it's just about, it's more a sort of management and probably something for the group leaders to agree in terms of processes and procedures that you all would apply to, really.
Sorry, the bit I forgot to mention first up, which links to that point, there is a bit of the form on the notes that actually, for the first time, expressly indicate that, for sake of argument, neighbouring ward councillors can assume the role of the ward councillor in certain eventuality, illness, holiday, whatever it might be, because that's been a sort of uncertain area until now, and I think it is appropriate personally that, not that you abrogate your responsibilities and duck, but there is some cover in appropriate reasons.
Right, Councillor Hankins and Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I welcome this proposal to more formulate the process of calling in and the whole and the efficiency of the planning process. Like Councillor Toy, I have some concerns about the possible impact on democracy. If you look at I would hope in Appendix 1 that the proposed form is more than just a tick box operation, in that where things are debatable, then the member calling in will have the opportunity to explain himself or herself in a bit more detail. Secondly, I welcome the proposals on planning training, because I think we've all seen that there is a necessity for that in this particular committee. So overall, I support this proposal to make the planning process and the operation of this committee more efficient. And I think the Assistant Director is to be complimented on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Let's move on to one of my list here now. Councillor Brown.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think I was going to make some opening remarks similar to what Councillor Hankins has just said. We do need to move from our present position. We know that change is afoot, which is going to require us to streamline our several processes, including how the Development Committee operates. Just a few things. If I was wearing a similar hat to Mr. Reid, the planning inspector, I would say, yeah, it's fine to try and rationalise officer time, reduce the pressure on their time by bringing things to committee unnecessarily. That's a laudable aim, and I fully endorse it. But we don't seem to have the statistical evidence to compare us with other comparator neighbouring district councils as to what, you know, their workload is. I couldn't, in all truth, tell you, if I was in the witness box giving evidence, whether, you know, we take on more work at this committee than other district councils in the county. I'm assuming that our performance is fairly similar to theirs, but I don't actually know. So that's one thing, one point I would make. Now, I'm also a fully paid up member of the Digital Luddites, and I see nothing here. It's no secret that people are well aware of that. I see no mention here of what someone would do if they've dropped their laptop in a lake, but they've printed something off and they need to get it to the processing unit. So, you know, a postal address option, or, you know, advice that you can scan it to the email, which I suppose is a given. Probably we don't need a special mention about that. But there is a bias towards digitalism in the way this has been set up. So that's another point. Just looking at the form, on the grounds for the call-in, we've got a very narrow box which just about has space to put the date in. So how will that work? You know, you've got a raft of policies that you might have to refer to. And we see on interactive forms that there's a mention of how many words you're capped at. So that might be useful for both officers as well as us to have some guidance as to about how long we should bang on for. Now, the other thing about the point raised by Councillor Kim Toy is quite an important one. We've got better at this, but when I first came onto the committee nearly 5 years ago, officers would disappear on holiday, particularly in August, which is, you know, well earned, I am sure. And I wish them happy holidays, but it was very hit and miss whether they put an out of office on their email when they did that. Some, let's say, some were better at it than others. And also there was no streamlined guidance on what would happen to a member emailing the department in the absence of that officer on holiday. So, and we've got better at that, but I did raise that with the previous head of planning, Russell's predecessor, and got a bit of a tin ear on that, let's say, put it politely, which I don't think will happen nowadays, I am pleased to say. So there's something else actually that can help this new system, and I don't know whether we always get a read receipt link on the email that comes out from an officer saying, you know, you've got 5 days, not a minute less, not a minute longer, to respond to this email. Do you want to call it in under members protocol? So my machine probably has got one. If it has, I haven't discovered it. I'm not particularly interested as a fully paid up member of the digital Luddites, but I just mentioned it, that might be something that we could particularly look at. And just borrowing from wards who have 2 members, got Gerard sat here to my right, he would say to Nigel, I'm off on my regular cruise. Sorry about that. Sorry about that. On my regular planning inspection at the Sandals in St Vincent. So can you mind the shop? Now that would work well, wouldn't it? Because he, you know, Nigel would say, look, you know, I'll dip into your emails, just make the arrangements or whatever. So we might be able to borrow perhaps from that sort of scenario and maybe encourage a buddying up system. It seems to be one of the few things that works quite well in the House of Commons, that if you're going to be away for a vote, you buddy up. So pairing, exactly. So that could be something. The only other thing, finally, you'll be pleased to hear, is
at the time.
Well, just a few things actually.
Please be brief.
You know, I always aim to have that aspiration, Mr. Chairman. Time extensions on planning applications. This is one for Jeff. Are we going to get it in the stats report on a monthly basis? Are we moving to a point where more, you know, less than 50% of our applications have a time extension request? Once, hopefully, we get nutrient neutrality cracked, which is obviously skewing those figures unnecessarily at the moment. I would say as well that I probably forgot what I was going to say there, but yeah, this is extremely welcome, and in particular the continuous professional development, which I think it's commonly referred to as the training for officers and us alike. Some not breakfast clubs. Can we have some lunch clubs, please, for the training, possibly?
Have we got there, Mr. Bide?
I think. Did anybody mention lunch?
I was about to.
So can I respond? And I will be briefer than.
And I thank the assistant director for
And I will
all
do
the work he's done.
my best to be briefer than Councillor Brown's introduction. So I've got 8 things. He said, 1 or 2 of which overlapped with what Councillor Hankins said before. So I'll cover them in one go rather than do them separately if I can. I could do the classic political view of just answering the easy one and forgetting about the other 7. So thank you for welcoming it. end of statement. But anyway, on the other bit. So firstly, a couple of points. Indicators you referred to a couple of times. So we'll come back to the suite of indicators, but I would expect that would help you do two things in relation to what you've mentioned. One is comparators with others. Okay, so we'll be providing some stuff that you could then assess with others, and I'm quite keen to persuade some of our Norfolk crew to report on similar sorts of things. Secondly, those indicators are likely to include your seventh item, which was extensions of time. So actually one of the things I think we should be reporting to you on, for sake of argument, is the average time to determination, and that some of our stats, which is in line with how government want us to do them at the moment, do mask performance, because actually if we extend time repeatedly and still do it within 5 years, it still counts as a positive kind of thing. But that might be 1800 days, which doesn't look so good if you put it into date terms. So we'll come back to the discussion on indicators. The other bit for the avoidance of doubt is, from my take, this is about improving our processes and not reducing the number of stuff that comes to committee. Okay, so personal view, you might all disagree, but last year, 2023, bearing in mind you meet every 4 weeks, generally speaking, have in your head roughly how many applications you think we might have considered in 2023 across 12 or 13 meetings. I'm not going to do the roundtable who guesses what, but the answer I think was 50, or if it wasn't, it was 1 or 2 from 50. So 50 applications a year across 12 meetings, about 4 to 5 a time, a la today. Seems about right to me instinctively. So this is not coming from an officer perspective saying we want to make even more decisions than we already do. It is about the transparency and clarity of the reasons for stuff coming in onto committee. Then I'm leaping into a realm of reporting to my portfolio holder that I am going on holiday for 2 weeks in August. I'm not going on a cruise. And I will have an out of office on, which will tell you where to go politely for support in my absence. Whilst you might have got a less than enthusiastic reaction the last time you raised it, it did prompt something, because Mr. Lyon has drafted and people are generally using the standard out of office, which points people. Having said that, it is inevitable that occasionally somebody will forget, because somebody does, and there are ways the organisation can impose itself into people's inbox to sort it, but you can only do that if you know it's happening, kind of thing. So there are bits and pieces we need to do in there. Personally, the one I disagree with my portfolio holder on is I'm not a great fan of read receipt related stuff, I have to say. That's just a personal view. I get somewhere in excess of 400 emails a week already. If the 300 I send, if I put read receipt on them, that then appreciate you don't necessarily have to read them, but you've got to remember them. But if councillors want read receipt bits, we could discuss that within the constitutional related bit, because coming back to Councillor Hankins's point, from my take, this is not about reducing councillors' ability to call things into committee. Come back to it's about transparency of reasoning. Arguably, there needs to be an arbiter as to what's acceptable or not. If I was being slightly flippant, you might be happy with the arbiter being me. You might prefer it to be him. I don't really care in that, guys, but we can come back to that. Sorry, Chair. We can come back to that when we get to discussing the constitutional component of this, because actually it sits in that bit, not the bit I'm seeking your agreement to start from the 1st of September. Now, I think either I've forgotten something you said by way of additional point, or you've now forgotten it, but I hope I covered it roughly. I think you nodded.
I was just thinking, there's an opportunity here. I'm quite happy to be the arbiter if you pay the going rate.
Okay. We've got 10 minutes. I'd like to close the meeting at 12:30. Let's have to be elsewhere this afternoon. So we've got John Toyle and Callum.
briefly, Mr. Chairman, I'm amazed that a Luddite knows about read receipts. Fantastic. The world moves on, he's learning.
Not about expanding boxes on
I
Word
would, yeah.
documents.
Yeah, in terms of filling it in and send it back in that, surely a web form's the answer. Anybody can fill in a web form. We all do it every day. And then finally, it would be helpful, the weekly list that you send out, I think, to make sure that everybody's alert, as we spoke about with me. It's only because I'm on the committee that I knew that application was coming in. Why not add the applications that are coming to committee to that weekly list? There's a committee this week and here's the applications that are in. And I do believe that that list, I have to forward it on to my parish councils. Can we not send it to parish councils as well? So, but I think that, yes, because if you've got someone who's not on the development committee, it's been called in by yourself, they won't be aware. And to save you alerting them individually, just add it to that form and everybody's got it. A suggestion, that's all.
So very quickly, a couple of points. One, apologies, that was the one bit of Councillor Brown's I forgot to mention it. Yes, the form is expandable, but we'll come up with a way of, if you can't fill in the form, you can do it, whatever. Secondly, not sure about the last point of adding it to that list, because that's going to be quite complicated in terms of the bureaucracy, but making sure councillors know something is on the committee in their patch is important. And I suspect somebody at the other end of the table has taken note of.
Just to add, when I write to all development committee members, I actually write to all members across the council and point out which applications are on. So all members, irrespective if they sit on the committee, will be notified.
Oh, that's great, because I only see the development stuff. I'm not seeing that, but thank you. That's great.
Yeah, and I think on that point, therefore, that the email, misquoting Councillor Brown's previous one, should probably list what the applications are and where they are, and not just say, here's the agenda so you can go and look at it, kind of thing, which I think is what you're needing, isn't it? Yeah.
Councillor Ringer?
Thank you. Just a couple of, I suppose, hypothetical points here about if I was to use this form, call something in, and through various processes it was appealed, the Monitor Office can determine that it shouldn't be called in. Can I circumnavigate that by just submitting the form again, but with some different evidence? And also, I suppose, if it was refused and I sort of, okay, that's fine, but then perhaps some supplementary documents were submitted by the applicant, or a whole host of objections came in, would I be able to again look at that? Going back to what Councillor Kimtoy said earlier about, you know, for example, I'm away for a week or whatever and I haven't got access to my emails, I'll sometimes, or I usually put on there, in an emergency, phone me up, this is my number. That's in my view, I'd be happy for somebody, a planning officer, to phone me up and say, you've only got 5 days, I notice you're out of office. Could I articulate something over the phone to somebody in that theoretical circumstance that would involve me not having to necessarily fill out the form? For me, I'd probably be fine with it, but for other members, it might be more difficult, especially if they're abroad.
Yeah, I think the challenge here is we've got 40 different councillors who probably will have 27 different views as to what the kind of the pseudo out of office backup alternative is. So I think we probably, but the key one probably is being clear what your version is individually within whatever out of office you put on, isn't it, in that, guys? The second point, which is your first one, is, I think, valid points, but that's probably part of the, as we get to the constitution debate bit. I mean, in all realism, comes back to, I think, my first observation back to Councillor Jontoy at the start. I'll add something into this that says first call will be go back and suggest you have another go at writing it fractionally better and some support in that territory. But I'd be very, very, very surprised if there was more than 1 or 2 a year that councillors actually want to come forward that don't.
You've had lots to say, Andrew, so I've got others who wish to speak. Councillor Holiday.
Thank you, Chair.
for your patience.
As the top of the leaderboard, calling things in, I think this is great, actually. It'll make my life a lot easier. What's the, I may have missed this, I may have drifted off when you were talking, but when is it actually going to be done, this form? What point? Because obviously the earlier you do it, the better, because then your poor old planning officer doesn't go and write lots of stuff that doesn't get needed. But doesn't seem to be a time frame here.
So, no, fair question. So, from my take, I would much rather work in a completely different manner to you, all many of your aspirations on this, and I'm not meaning it critically, because I'd like to know on day one that you want it called in ideally, because then the case officer can work to that. But that's not realistic in the Norfolk environment. And I'm not meaning that critically, where people have got into a culture, quite understandably, of waiting to see what everybody thinks about it, and then waiting to know what the officer thinks about what everybody else thinks about it before calling it in. If we want to change the culture, we need to change both the culture and the rules to force the culture change, which is the constitutional bit. You know, if councillors want to take a view that if you haven't called it in within 3 weeks of receipt, you lose your rights to, from my take, brilliant. I have a sneaking suspicion there won't be 21 voting in favour of that out of 40 at the moment, but I think we probably have that debate next time about how the constitution looks on that point, because it's not directly relevant to this form, although it is a very important issue, because it does, and I'm not meaning this critically, it does impact on performance and to some degree on applicants' views of our service if they find out relatively last minute that something needs to come to committee. The only not good point of that is this council is a council that doesn't have a significant track record of overturning officers' recommendations on grounds that, let's just say, look a bit flimsy. You don't overturn that much. Actually, your track record is overturning recommendations for refusal to approval. Generally speaking, applicants are happy with that. The neighbours might not be, but applicants tend to be. You know, there are councils who have a very strong track record of overturning officers' recommendation for approval to refusal. Invariably, they lose tons of appeals and it costs a lot of money and the service reputation ain't great. But thankfully, from my perspective, you don't have that and hopefully never will. Some of that's a positive reflection of Mr. Lyon that he and his team continue to make, you know, sensible, rational recommendations, etc. But you know, that's where it is a constitutional issue mainly. So.
That's another way. Okay. Looking at the time and the fact that there's further discussions will be needed through Constitution Working Party, unless there is something absolutely new to be added to this. 30 seconds, Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I have raised this with the Assistant Director.
No, 30 seconds, I say.
Quite happy for Lauren to time me if he can for 30 seconds. It's just to say, I think that in the guidance notes at the end, it would be useful to have a link to something in the Constitution that deals with how you determine whether you're predetermined or not, bringing it to committee, and how you should conduct your contribution at committee if you are predetermined when you're calling it in. That's all.
That can be looked at.
So can I just try and summarise just quickly in the 2 minutes remaining what I think the steer you've given in terms of the minutes of the outcome of this. So number one, endorsement of the training proposal. Okay. Number two is endorsement of the form, but comfort of splitting it into the two parts. So the form starting on the 1st of September and the two yellow bits that Ms Gregory showed earlier being put back to the rounded constitution bit, and then 3 more bits of text into the explanatory bit. One, something about committee expectation around representations from somebody calling it in. One, something about officers going back to councillors to refine the reasons in appropriate circumstances, and one, Councillor Brown's 27th point, that final one, about the additional line directing to the code of whatever it's called, conduct thing, best practice. So we will get that updated, and I will just, rather than via committee, just send it round to you so you see it one more time, but it will be the thing that goes out from the 1st of September to you all. And I hate to say we will be tough on rejecting things that come in via other routes, including from officers as well. Okay, so I think unless we go all in, it'll get confusing. Okay.
Right, we have on page 1192 recommendations. Do you require a formal vote on that to proceed?
Because that bit technically doesn't require your decision. It's just I'm comforted with the body language.
Thank you. There being no private business, meeting is closed.